It's Wednesday, the 2nd of November. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen, Labour's Richard Burgon, Naomi Smith from Best for Britain, which campaigns for a closer relationship with the EU, and the non-affiliated peer, Baroness Fox. Today. Ministers want new laws to stop these kinds of protests. Are they right?
Our rent increased 50%-ish, and that was just going to be completely unaffordable. Yeah. You can't enjoy life. If you're having to worry about the £9 and the £10.
Should rents be frozen across the UK?
We will prosper and flourish and thrive as never before if we leave the European Union on June the 23rd and take back control.
That was 6 years ago, but do we need a new relationship with the EU? Keir Starmer will face Rishi Sunak for the second time at Prime Minister's Questions, as more evidence emerges of the conditions in this asylum processing centre.
We can't go to the toilet, we can't take a shower, take a bath, we don't have any clothes. We are not animals.
So, having been told he wouldn't go, to telling us he might be going, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is now going to the climate summit COP27. Here's the tweet from the Prime Minister. There is no long-term prosperity without action on climate change. There is no energy security without investing in renewables. That is why I will attend COP27 next week to deliver on Glasgow's legacy of building a secure and sustainable future. That was last year at COP26. Has he made the right decision?
Well, whether he goes or not is up to Rishi Sunak. He is the Prime Minister. I just hope it's not another opportunity for us to be bullied and pressured into adopting more policies which will cost the taxpayer even more money. I hope he'll use it as an opportunity to put pressure on the countries who don't do their fair share, such as China and Russia.
Is that who you feel bullied by?
I do feel we've come under a lot of pressure, and it's only fair that other countries take their share of the burden.
Has he made the right decision, Rishi Sunak, in attending the climate summit, Richard?
Well, it's definitely important that he goes. I was amazed that there was any doubt that he was going to go in the first place. But what we really need are the policies to be ditched of new oil and gas fields. If we're going to be serious about tackling climate change, we've seen the United Nations report on what a dangerous position the world is in. The government needs to change its policy and there can be no more new oil and gas fields. The climate catastrophe is the biggest threat facing humanity and we need action. It is an emergency.
Naomi, what do you think?
A new Conservative Prime Minister, a new U-turn. It's good to know some things don't change. If following the pattern of his predecessors, of course it's the right thing for him to go. Britain's global reputation relies on it. You need to send a signal to the world that you take it seriously. And actually, during his own leadership campaign, he made quite a lot of the future generations in terms of the economy. And we shouldn't be saddling them. We need to tackle things now. And, of course, the same must go for climate. So it's good that he's going. I'm glad he's changed his mind.
Yeah, well, the Green MP, Caroline Lucas, agrees with you, Naomi. This is a screeching U-turn. It was an embarrassing misstep on the world stage. Claire, do you agree with Rishi Sunak? There is no long-term prosperity without action on climate change.
No, I think that Richard said, you know, this is an emergency, a crisis, and we can't solve it. I think there's an energy crisis, and we can't solve that without oil and gas. That's the reality. The funny thing about this decision is that when Rishi was kind of, you know, got his coronation as the Prime Minister, a lot of people were very unhappy. The one thing that I heard from people was, well, at least he says he's not going to go to COP27. There was a bit of admiration for that because it looked as though he was saying the important thing is to sort the problems out at home. He came under a huge amount of pressure in many ways from a group of both activists and the media and so on. And he has U-turned. But actually, I think it looks weak and vacillating. I don't think he's going to win himself any favours. I mean, of course, he'd be very popular with the Greens, but, you know.
What do you think in response to Claire? This is an energy crisis, not necessarily a climate emergency that needs Rishi Sunak to go to COP.
Well, Rishi Sunak isn't dealing with the cost of living crisis relating to energy bills or anything else, so he needs to sort that out. But this idea that it was some kind of serious option for Joe Biden to go to COP27, but for Rishi Sunak to try and posture to the right wing of his own party, people like Andrew perhaps, and not go, it just didn't look like serious leadership.
But is he posturing to you now? That's the thing I don't understand. I mean, if he said he wasn't going to go for whatever, and he made it clear why, and then he comes under a lot of pressure from people like you, and then he goes, I mean, why is that not posturing to you or the people who are criticising him? I'm saying that I don't think he needed to go, but he'd made a decision he wasn't going to go. That's the point, and he'd argued it, and there was some popularity.
And Richard's point about, you know, the energy crisis. 1 minute he's in the Chamber of the House of Commons claiming his constituents won't be able to pay their heating bills, and then he doesn't want us to exploit our existing oil and gas reserves for the perverse reason that it's easier to hit net zero if we import our carbon. We bring the carbon in from elsewhere, it's not on our footprint. It's nothing for the environment at all.
Andrew, you've said that you want him to use it to put pressure on the very countries that should be doing more, but it is those countries that won't be there. So by going, at least he's aligning with Biden and other world leaders that take this kind of thing seriously. And do you really want to be in the club of those that don't go and who aren't lifting?
Do we need those oil and gas, though, licences to be explored?
There should be no new oil and gas fields because there's a climate emergency.
Right.
And
don't complain about the prices
let Richard.
Andrew just said, and I was shocked to hear he may want to reconsider his comment. He said that I claim that my constituents can't afford to pay their bills. It's a reality that they can't afford to pay their energy bills.
Because of the policies you're espousing.
There's a cost of living crisis. We need proper action from the government. For example, a series of wealth taxes. They won't do it. And that is a failure of leadership at a time of economic crisis.
So it's OK to bring half our gas in from Norway, but not to use our own gas?
It's just so weird. This is so weird
crazy.
It's so weird to me because people are genuinely, as you rightly always point out, Richard, are really scared and suffering at the moment about winter, about how they're going to be able to afford to put the heating on, about the cost of living crisis. And what we therefore need is cheap, reliable energy, long-term and short-term.
And what's wrong with renewables? What's wrong with renewables, Claire?
But on the coldest...
Well, that's not fossil fuel, then, is it?
On the coldest day in winter, when the wind's not blowing...
Let me just complete this sentence. I have no objection to renewables. I object to putting all of our energy into renewables and closing down valuable, cheap, reliable sources of energy like oil and gas for ideological reasons, because I do not think that the climate emergency is as much of an emergency.
All right. Well, these people disagree. Let's have a look at these pictures of protesters. Just Stop Oil. There they are in Downing Street, or not quite in it or on it, but they're trying to get there in their orange jackets. They're being moved on by police, but then block the road at Whitehall. They are protesting, obviously, against any further oil and gas exploration. But also here, let me just show you the headline in The Guardian. Peers in the Lords are called on to kill public order bill targeting these sorts of climate activists. Petition signed by 300,000 people demands Home Office drops attempt to overthrow democracy. Andrew Bridgen, why do we need these particular laws? They were thrown out of the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act. It was to extend the restrictions on public protest, issues like locking on and the sort of thing we saw there. Why do we need them?
Well, I actually served on the Bill Committee for that bill when it went through, and I was very supportive of the measures. In the Midlands, we've got an oil terminal at Kingsbury which serves all the oil, the diesel and the heating, all the kerosene and the petrol for the Midlands, and those protesters have been taking extreme measures. They've been breaking into an oil terminal, locking themselves onto tankers and tanks, climbing up on top. One spark in that facility, and you'll hear the bang in London when that goes off. They're disrupting the economy, so people going to work, blocking the roads, and it is out of proportion. The right to protest is sacrosanct, but not to disrupt the lives of millions and millions of people.
Richard?
Well, the right to protest does need to be sacrosanct, but the problem with this public order bill is that it's not it's targeting everybody. It's targeting the democratic freedom of the right to peaceful protest, a hard-won right in our society. If it hadn't have been, for example, for the suffragettes adopting tactics which many found annoying and disruptive at the time, women wouldn't have won the vote. And what we've got is a really dangerous authoritarian drift from this government. They're talking about stop and search around protest without suspicion. These are draconian, hair-raising measures. It's an important part of our democracy. And the final point I make on this is the authoritarian drift from the government. We've got them wanting to, in effect, ban strikes in the public sector, introducing voter ID and introducing draconian anti-protest laws.
Let's just stick with this. Let me get Andrew to respond to this. Draconian and dangerous. Is there any need for these specific extensions of powers?
These measures aren't only to protect the public, they're actually to protect the protesters themselves. They are putting themselves in danger. They're digging under roads, outside oil terminals, then going into the tunnels, causing the road. They're causing huge disruption. Who's funding these people? I mean...
The police themselves have said they don't need these powers, that they have sufficient powers to deal with this already, and they said that during the policing bill, which is now an act that Richard referred to. And I think the authoritarian creep is the concerning thing, and this erosion
that wasn't
of our
the evidence we heard at the Bill
rights.
Committee, I can assure you.
And what this bill does is it has very vague definitions and a very low threshold for being able to exercise and use these powers, on the balance of probabilities. Speak to any lawyer. That is a very concerning phrase to have on the statute books. And so those of us that believe in freedom of speech and the right to protest, we need to be able to do that. And this government has been closing down avenues to accountability, whether it's been through the Judicial Review Bill, through the Policing Bill, through the Elections Bill. Now, all of these acts that are going to make it harder for us to express our discontent with what the government is doing.
Andrew, I'll let you respond while we're looking at these pictures. This is another protest of Just Stop Oil in recent days. This is orange paint being sprayed outside the Bank of England. I think they went on to spray the News Corporation building too. These specifics, you say they're very vague, Naomi, and Claire, I'll come to you. You say they're very vague. It says new criminal offences of locking on and going equipped to lock on, a new offence of obstructing major transport works, a new offence of interference with key national infrastructure. Richard is right. There is an extension of stop and search powers, and that could come without suspicion, I think, as you called it.
And protest ASBOs as well.
Well, there is a difference, though. You say the police don't want any more powers. Do you say they do?
There were certainly senior police officers who said that they did need these powers. We took in evidence. And what my advice is, yes, the right to protest is sacrosanct, but don't go to a protest with chains and locks to lock yourself on or glue.
I mean, we debated this for many hours yesterday in the House of Lords.
Oh, right, yeah.
So fresh from my mind, I mean, the first thing to note is it's a bit like class war on London streets at the moment, which is ordinary citizens trying to get around, coming across the protesters and dragging them off, and basically furious and frustrated at these people who are out to disrupt them.
And what about emergency vehicles?
Just hold on. I object to the suffragettes analogy, by the way, because there you have a situation where they were forced because they didn't have the vote to take those tactics. Here are people who have the vote who basically say, you won't listen to us. When I had an argument with them, we can't persuade anyone, so we've got to take action. So it's protest for bullying. But I completely object to this bill. Yeah. There is a problem here of a crisis of policing. The police are not dealing with these protests with the powers that they have. Why the government imagine that giving them more powers means that they'll be more adequately able to police is mad to me.
Especially after the report this morning about what we now know about the police.
We know that the problem is a crisis of policing. And it's just as, to me, performative as those people, those wallies, using orange paint to desecrate, architecture and throwing paint over, or whatever it is, soup over art.
Yes.
It's just as performative for the government to bring in a bill that tells the public this will deal with the protesters. But actually, the problem is the police, who have the powers now, won't deal with the protesters.
All right, well, let's pick up on both those. Is it authoritarian creep? It's not actually going to do
No, but it will put more pressure on the police to act. They have got new powers. Going to a protest with glue on you, adhesives on you.
It's politicising the police and bringing them into political arguments that they don't want to be drawn into, putting them in difficult positions. as they were over the Sarah Everard vigil. It's putting the police in a difficult position they don't want to be put in.
What do you say, what do you say in response to Claire about the protesters themselves stopping people going to work? It isn't analogous with the suffragettes in the way that Claire actually said, and actually they're not going to get the public on their side.
Meaningful political change requires changing hearts and minds, and I think some of their actions are not doing that. So of course
they don't intend to, though, Naomi. I suppose that's what really is upsetting. Is they say, "Oh, we've tried that tactic. We can't persuade them." So that's why I think it's anti-democratic what they're doing. I actually find it contemptuous what they're doing, but I don't want that and the popular revulsion against that to allow the government to bring in things which means that, for example, you can have a 24-hour tag on you for a year when you haven't committed a criminal offence.
All right,
this is an outrage, and the government are also evading the responsibility for dealing with the problem we have now.
The government will pretend that this legislation is just about Just Stop Oil and various other particular groups.
Well, it might be, mightn't it?
It will be used. It will be used against trade unionists, against peace protesters, against people that I agree with and disagree with. The point is not whether we individually agree or disagree with any protest.
Exactly.
It's about the right to protest in a democratic society. And if this was happening in another country, people would be saying...
Let me let Andrew respond.
You object to someone being searched and then possibly arrested for going equipped to lock on. They've got chains, locks, glue at a protest. But it's been law for a long time that going equipped to commit crime,
so why do you
burglary,
need another law?
You could stop a persistent burglar in his car travelling at night, fine, he's got all the tools to break into someone's house, and you would say, then you're going to be arrested for going...
Need another law.
The minister explained to us that if you got stopped and you had a bicycle chain, and you were able to prove that the bicycle chain was for the purposes of locking your bike up, you would be OK. Consider that in
Surely
a free
that should be on the bicycle if you're walking.
No, for goodness sake. No, it's a bicycle chain. It's like saying, oh, you've got glue, you've got equipment. If you read the broad powers of this bill, it will not actually stop these protests, but it does lay the precedent for ensuring that people think, God, I'm frightened to go out.
Let me put that part as a, because we've got to move on. But finally, on that,
who carries glue with them on a normal basis?
Andrew, can you see?
How dare you even ask?
Let Andrew respond. Can you see what guarantees would there be for the rest of the panellists here who think that these powers are too extensive, go too far in terms of trying to tackle a problem that actually some of them don't think it will solve?
Well, ultimately, the bill will go through in some form or other. It will hopefully be implemented by the police. If it's going too far, then we will come under enormous pressure to repeal, and we will, won't we?
All right, on
that,
we're going to talk about rent controls. Let's have a look at this headline in The Guardian. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, the Labour Mayor of London, calls for rent freeze as rough sleeping rises by a fifth in London. Now, the Scottish Government has already introduced legislation quite recently aimed at freezing most rents until the end of March 2023. Let's talk to Laura Blair. She is a university researcher who's renting in London. She's a former member of the Labour Party. Laura, tell us about your situation when it's come to renting.
Hi, so I've been renting in London for about 10 years, just over, and in that time I've had 12 addresses in and around London. As a renter, I'm experiencing what many others are experiencing, which is the fact that our rent costs a huge proportion of our income. You are forced to choose between a reasonably priced property and a property that's safe and of a good standard. I've moved most of the time because of extremely poor property conditions, but also because of rent increases that I simply wasn't able to afford. Rents are increasing massively in comparison to wages, which are stagnating. There's also all these associated costs of moving, not to mention the kind of psychological effect that it has for renters. I don't feel connected to a community because I'm regularly forced to move out of communities. Aside from the access to healthcare, even something as simple as registering with a doctor's or a dentist is impossible if you have to move every single year.
Do you think, Laura, sorry for interrupting, do you think politicians take this issue and your situation and no doubt millions of others seriously enough?
Absolutely not. We haven't seen any of the kinds of help that we could have. The potential, the sort of temporary ban on evictions during the pandemic didn't extend long enough. There are so many people who are at risk of becoming homeless. Most people don't have the savings because they don't earn enough to be able to get themselves out of trouble if they lose their jobs. My partner was made redundant during the pandemic, and therefore I've been having to pay the rent alone. And it was only because I was lucky enough to have savings that I was able to survive this far.
Okay.
But it looks like we're not going to be able to continue renting in London because we simply can't afford it anymore.
Laura, stay with us and listen to the discussion, and we'll come back to you towards the end. Has it come of time, the idea of rent controls, Andrew Bridgen? When you listen to somebody like Laura in the situation that she's in, what's the alternative?
Well, rent controls have been tried many times before in different places around the world, in America, Sweden, since the 1940s. And although it is on the surface an attractive policy, it ignores the clear unintended consequences that rent controls bring in, which is it will reduce the stock of houses available for rent, reduce the quality of the houses available for rent, because people won't invest in them. And what we'll also end up with is a black market in sub-renting at prices above the approved rents.
Right, so you're happy just to see rents climb and climb, and every time landlords
I'm
want
not.
to get
I'm
more
not,
money, they kick out someone like Laura?
Level, the intervention of rent freezes has been shown time and time again around the world that it actually damages the people you're trying to help.
Why do you support rent controls or a freeze in rents for a certain amount of time? As in Scotland, they're doing it to March 23.
Well, I think that every politician, regardless of party, should listen to the account that Laura and constituents across the country have given of the plight of people in the rented sector. But I think we should return to this idea of rent controls because Andrew mentions other countries, whereas in fact rent controls have existed in this country for decades, both under Tory and Labour governments. It was only in 1988 that legislation was brought in to ditch it. We're going through a real cost of living emergency at the moment. Therefore, we need to think what can be done to help people get through this situation. And we can't have a situation where, in the sixth biggest economy in the world, people in the kind of situation that Laura and so many people across the country are in. So it's not extreme. It's not unprecedented. As I say, it existed in this country for decades and decades. It can work and it will work. But what we need, as Sadiq suggested, is a commission into working out what's the best way it can work. I know that Acorn, for example, have suggested, the Renters' Union, have suggested a policy whereby rent should be no more than 30% of the median income in an area. In London, for example, my understanding is it can be around 70% of people's income going on rent. And that clearly has a knock-on effect on all the other necessities that they need.
This is a supply issue. Successive governments over the last 40, 50, 60 years have just not built enough homes of all shades. It was a Conservative Prime Minister in Harold Macmillan who was the last one to build at scale, the scale that would keep pace with demand, and we need that level back again. So this is a plaster on a wound that actually requires far greater triage. And we need the political bravery, and it takes much more political bravery to say we actually will finally commit to building the level of housing that we need than it is to talk about policies like these. There's going to need to be a suite. We are in a cost of living emergency, but that cost of living emergency is also impacting on the buy-to-let landlords whose mortgages are going to go up from maybe a 2% rate to a 6-7% rate, and they will either have to offload that property or pass that on to tenants.
You're not a fan of freezing rents?
I'm a fan of building a lot more homes, including social homes, council homes.
That's
what we
long-term,
need.
isn't it? If we've got a cost of living crisis and rents are soaring, is it at least a medium-term measure to try and cap or stop rents going up even further?
Well, I do agree with the way Laura describes it as an emergency that's not having enough attention paid to it. And I think that when you're in that situation, and if you're a renter or if you care about the threat of homelessness, you might well be attracted to this kind of headline-grabbing proposal. It's just that it doesn't work because we'll have less houses to rent. And I absolutely agree with you, Naomi. I mean, my goodness, this is the housing problem. And the difficulty with an issue like this is more people will withdraw their houses for rental. That's what will happen. That's happened everywhere. Listen, in Sweden, it's funny. they've got rent controls, they've got an 11-year waiting list as a consequence for getting a house in Stockholm because there's not enough houses, and there's a thriving black market of money launderers who basically rent out unsafe accommodation. So I just don't want to make the question worse. If we treated this as the emergency that the Prime Minister should be solving, I would be going out and literally, physically building the houses. I would round up everybody and anybody who's unemployed, and I would build social housing, affordable housing, any housing.
But everyone says that, but no politician seems to be able to do it.
You can't then say, oh, they won't do that, so we'll do a policy that will make matters worse.
Right. Well, Laura, do you want to respond to what you've heard so far?
What I would say is that, yes, there are complications in terms of rent control. But some of the panel have talked about this kind of black market of housing. That already exists. That is already in place. There are already many people letting out incredibly unsafe properties to try and get around things like the landlord registration. And so there's so much more that could be done. Ending Section 21 is something that has been on the table for a long time and still hasn't happened. I know people who've been served Section 21 notices.
Oh, sorry, what is Section 21? Is that an eviction notice?
No fault eviction.
No fault
yes,
eviction.
Section 21 and no fault eviction. I know people who have had Section 21 served on them after entirely normal and being decent tenants. And it's simply so that the landlord can get new tenants in and raise the rent considerably.
I mean, Andrew,
that has not been taken off the table.
Right. I mean, Andrew, what can be done about that?
Well, it's in the pipeline to remove Section 21 to repeal. Coming back on the housing, North West Leicestershire, my constituency, we built 850 houses last year. We've done at least 850 for the last 5 years. If every constituency in the country did as much as we're doing, we could sort this out. We're also we've built 50 new council houses, which are exceptional quality. And I would say, when we took over the council in 2007 from Labour, they'd kept the rents down for the council houses, but 70%, it was the worst quality council housing in the country. It cost us £28 million to bring that up to the decent home standard, and with higher rents, we've kept it there ever since.
You can tell us about the house building in your constituency, Richard, in a moment. But first of all, to Claire's point that it will have unintended consequences, that landlords will just exit the market, so there'll be fewer properties to rent. And in fact, it could become more expensive. Do you accept that?
I don't buy that. I think the government needs to grasp the nettle, as they would see it, and take real action to protect renters. But I do agree that at the same time we need a massive programme of council house building. We also need to end the misuse of the term affordable housing, because what's deemed to be affordable housing in reality is quite often very unaffordable.
Absolutely. I mean, ask anyone who's looked up on a developer's website the entry price for affordable housing. It's often incredibly expensive. Look, Sadiq Khan's looked at things like London living rents, and you talked about 70% of salary having to go on rental properties in London. It is disgraceful. We do need to do something. I think there needs to be a measure of short-term interventions, but nothing will be as good a substitute as just building en masse at scale over time.
I would say I spoke to a really good organisation with the Housing Association with a novel new policy which I'm going to introduce to my council, whereby you rent for 5 years and then they give you the deposit and you buy the house, and that is a fantastic.
Well, I think part of the reason why we don't have enough homes is because so many council properties were sold off under Right to Buy under Thatcher and weren't sufficiently replaced.
Yeah, but that's it. They weren't replaced, were they? I mean,
exactly,
it's one thing to have done that, quite innovative at the time, and a lot of people, it was fantastically important for them. But then everybody stopped building council houses. I mean, both parties, as it happens, just stopped building. And that's one of the reasons why some of these arguments around regulations, around environmental problems with planning and so on, is why I worry about it, because everything becomes a priority to stop you building. And that, I mean, we've all heard these excuses so often. Wow. I do think we need to relook at the green
those
belt.
most reluctant to further development in my experience, normally the paint isn't dry on their new front door in my constituency, and they'll be the ones who'll say, we don't want any more houses
But there has to
here.
be more
It just can't
ambition,
be.
like building new towns, not just kind of sticking plasters.
We're doing
all
that
the
in my
time.
constituency.
And on that, I'm going to say goodbye to Laura Blair for joining us today. We're going to talk about Brexit. Let's have a look at this headline in The Independent. Rejoining EU takes record 14-point lead in latest poll. It is just one poll, but Nemi, tell us what it says to you. Is it time to reopen negotiations with the EU for a closer relationship?
Yes, we do need to do that, not because of this poll, though, but because we are facing a cost of living emergency. Businesses up and down the country are really suffering as a consequence of a poor trade and cooperation agreement. So trading businesses, SMEs in particular, that are now saddled with huge amounts of extra Brexit red tape and tariff barriers are suffering. What does that mean? That means they're either stopping trading with the EU or they're relocating, or in some cases, very sadly, they're choosing to close down. And that then has an impact on jobs and British livelihoods and, of course, the economy as a whole. So absolutely, we need to be resetting that relationship. Perhaps Rishi Sunak is able to reset that relationship.
Is that what you're calling for? What's best for Britain actually calling for?
What Best for Britain is calling for is for the removal of so many tariff barriers and red tape that has been brought in as a consequence of the very poor deal that
Rejoining the single market and the customs union?
Look, that's we left the EU. That is out. I think the people that answer this poll saying that they'd like to rejoin know that it necessarily won't happen anytime soon. But absolutely, we just need that deeper relationship. We need to make it better for British businesses.
And do you agree, Professor John Curtis has said that the shift in people supporting the idea of rejoining, or certainly a closer relationship, may be down to changes in the economic situation, and that trend may continue if it worsens?
Well, that's people to make those decisions. At the end of the day, we voted to leave. I'm interested in Naomi doesn't say as if the UK is the only place that's got a higher energy bills and a cost of living crisis. Of course, that's the same in the European Union itself.
But why do more people?
What we needed is that the agreements we made with the European to be implemented in the spirit of goodwill which they were intended, like the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it can't be right for 20% of all the checks on goods coming into the single market to be on the fraction of 1% of goods passing between the UK and Northern Ireland. That's not being fair and reasonable in any stretch of the imagination.
It's also not fair and reasonable to suggest that the UK hasn't had an extra layer of difficulty that other countries haven't had to contend with because of the difficulties that the form of Brexit that we were given has created. So doppelganger economies, there's been work done by the Centre for European Reform disaggregating the impacts of COVID and Ukraine from Brexit and showing that actually we do face a disproportionately
over the next 25 years,
becoming less trade intensive.
Over the next 25 years, even the EU admit that 95% of the world economic growth will not be in the European Union.
But we've
it's sclerotic.
We've got fruit farmers in the UK where 20% of their crop is rotting. This is lovely, healthy produce that is going unpicked because of labour shortages. We've taken evidence from all sorts of organisations. One was a school shoe manufacturer saying that the price of school shoes is having to go up as a consequence of my costs going up on the stuff that we have to import. We've got musicians who can't tour because the UK government said no to the EU's offer of a great visa touring agreement. So, these are real problems that are affecting
what you actually want us to sign up to is Theresa May's deal, where we'd be a vassal of the European Union. We're bound by their rules. That is not what we voted for when we left the European Union. And any politician who holds a seat in our Parliament who thinks that our laws are better made in Brussels doesn't deserve a seat.
What, like Tobias Ellwood, who recently, Tory MP on the programme, arguing to rejoin the single market to alleviate our economic woes, to quote him.
Tobias nearly left the Conservative Party and joined the Independent group.
I see. Yes. So should he go and do that, Andrew?
But that's a decision for him.
Richard, who do you agree with here in this debate in terms of much closer relationship or not?
I think the points that Naomi's making a common sense.
Right. So you do want a closer relationship?
By the way, I didn't vote for Johnson's rotten deal, Brexit deal after the general election. And I was very alarmed last week at the way the government are preparing, it seems to me, to have a bonfire of employment rights and environmental protections, and the way they brought it in where there's the sunset clause. Yeah. So doesn't require them to replace these laws with some employment protections with something the same or even similar. These laws and protections could well just go. And it seems to me that a lot of the right-wing ideologues in the Conservative Party, perhaps like Andrew, want to use Brexit as an opportunity, not to make it work in the interest of the majority of people in our country, but to turn us into a kind of mini United States with all the worst aspects of that off the shores of Europe. Less protection and stability for workers, less consumer protection, less protection in relation to water and all the rest of it. And that's not what people voted for. People don't want us to be like the United States of America in its worst aspects.
Would you want to rejoin the single market then?
I think, as Naomi said, that we're not disputing Brexit is done, but it's what, and I didn't support.
And you blamed, of course, the issue of Brexit for the loss, the disastrous loss of Labour in the 2019 election.
I didn't support Johnson's rotten Brexit deal after the election, but the Conservatives are using Brexit to drive through this free market fantasy against the interest of the majority of people.
Talking about using Brexit, I mean, since I've been in the Lords, which is like a couple of years now, it doesn't matter what debate we're having. Honestly, it really doesn't matter what debate we're having. There will be people who say, of course, that's because we left the European Union. It's like a drip, drip, drip. And so when you say that some right-wing ideologues are using Brexit, let me assure you, there are people on the right in the Tory party, on the left in the Labour Party, who say, oh, of course we accept Brexit, but if we'd only stayed in the EU, life would be a wonderful...
Well, Claire, on that, how is taking back control, people might ask, going on money, laws and borders?
It's going terribly.
Right.
It's going terribly. There's a number of things. And when you ask who governs, one of the difficulties we had and why people wanted to take back control was because they were told that if they had any queries or qualms about, for example, immigration, they couldn't ask that question because we had no choice because we were in the EU. Now we're in a situation whereby we're supposed to be taking control of our borders. We know that the elected politicians of this country are not doing it, and they'll be held to account. We're not told we've got no choice. If we have a closer relationship with the EU, I mean, this is what makes me laugh, is this idea that Brexit means that workers' rights are compromised, as though, A, the EU fought for workers' rights, when in fact workers fought for workers' rights, and the only guarantee of workers' rights are workers fighting for them, and actually the EU have never been... They've been a source of cheap labour so that we can say, oh, look, we can get in fruit pickers. They're nice and cheap if we get them in from Europe. That's not workers' rights, Richard. Come on.
On this question of workers' rights, I don't need any lectures on workers' rights. I was a trade union lawyer for 10 years before entering Parliament.
I was a trade unionist, not a lawyer, but a trade unionist
and then you had a change of heart. The point I'm making...
I'm going to break just for a moment because... We're going to welcome viewers from the BBC News Channel. We've got Prime Minister's questions, the second time Rishi Sunak faces Keir Starmer at the dispatch box in about 7 or 8 minutes' time. I'm here with my guests, Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen, Richard Bergen, Labour MP, Naomi Smith from Best for Britain and Baroness Claire Fox, Director for Academy of Ideas. Richard, you were just talking about workers' rights and whether or not they have been hard-won via the EU or not.
Well, of course, workers won workers' rights in our country, and the trade union movement did so, and Labour governments did so. The point I'm making is that there's nothing inevitable about this, but the Conservatives are using Brexit to try and remove these workers' rights and not replace them with the same or similar standards of protection. That's a political choice from the Conservatives on workers' rights that I object to.
Right, is that true? I mean, we had the former Minister for Brexit Opportunities, of course he's not in that post anymore, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who seemed to be tasked with looking at all the regulations of the EU. Can you understand people's concerns?
There's certainly EU regulations can be replaced by better targeted regulations from our Parliament. If we can't make better laws than the EU, we shouldn't have left. We can make better laws. But as far as this cheap labour from Europe, there is no cheap labour in this country because every worker that comes over here they will need access to healthcare, to housing. That exacerbates the housing crisis we've got. It isn't cheap. They might not be on very high wages. They're suppressing wages by for the population we've got here. We've seen that.
Naomi?
But we're in a situation where we have 60% of nurses considering quitting. You know, we are in a public services emergency situation as well. The pressures on them because of labour shortages are acute. We've got incredibly low unemployment. We've got an ageing population. We have a government which is anti-natalist in its policies. It doesn't make it easy for working people, and particularly working women, to take time out of their careers to have children. There is a whole enormous sort of socioeconomic policy vacuum that successive governments have failed to tackle, which helped lead to the result that we got in the 2016 referendum. But on the sort of the race to the bottom, if you like, on standards and regulations, you know, we know that there are all sorts of issues around food in particular, and food coming from the United States, the chlorinated chicken, the hormone-filled beef, all of those sorts of things that the government would probably quite like us to be able to import. And the reaction from British farmers across Scotland, Wales, England, saying this is certainly not why we supported Brexit, is palpable.
All right, we're going to move on because we're going to join political correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart in Central Lobby. I'm going to ask you in just a moment about an update on the questions facing Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, about herself and also the conditions at that migrant and migration processing plant, also for asylum seekers at Manston. But first, because it's on almost all of the front pages, David, tell us about the fallout of the former Health Secretary's decision. I think he's in the jungle now, where he's arrived.
Or certainly en route at least, or on his way to Australia. Matt Hancock, former Health Secretary, previous candidate to be leader of the Conservative Party, is going into the jungle as part of I'm a Celebrity. There's been quite a fallout from that already. He has lost the Conservative Party whip, meaning he's currently sitting as an independent. He's talked about his thinking behind taking up this opportunity. He's saying that, you know, it's not all about the cheque he'll be getting for this, and he will be donating some of what he gets, he says, to charities. But he believes politicians, if they want to connect with people, have to go where younger people, perhaps people not engaged with politics, are. And he believes that's on I'm a Celebrity. He believes that's in the Australian jungle, eating all sorts of things as they make contestants do on this programme. But certainly at an official level from the Prime Minister's official spokesman yesterday, saying that the feeling is that Conservative MPs, especially at this point in time where people are so worried about the cost of living, should be focusing on those issues close to their constituents, and some other Conservative MPs not being very obliging about this decision that he's made. All
right, well, let's bring things closer to home and the questions for Suella Braverman, particularly around the asylum processing plant at Manston.
Yeah, this may well be an issue that comes up shortly in Prime Minister's questions. Now, Suella Braverman facing questions on two fronts, really, at the moment, both about her political suitability to be in the role and how she's handling policy as Home Secretary. So we know that migrant processing centre at Manston has had huge problems lately in terms of people being there much longer than they should be there, the numbers being much larger than they should be at any time. The Chief Inspector of Prisons really questioning the conditions that people are living there in. We have heard from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, over the past 24 hours. He said yesterday the numbers had fallen substantially, getting people out of that into more permanent accommodation, such as hotels. But there's also been questions asked about whether or not the Home Secretary was doing enough to fulfil her statutory duty of providing accommodation for these people. That's something she insists she did. She said she's never blocked the booking of hotel rooms for people. Yes. But certainly something I think opposition parties may well pick up on this afternoon.
David Wallace-Lockhart in Central Lobby, thank you very much. We only have a few minutes to go. You raised the issue of Rishi Sunak's personal wealth last weekend in a question in Prime Minister's Questions. And this, despite the fact your colleague, Pat McFadden, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, said it's not relevant, it's not a line of questioning we want to see. What point are you trying to make?
Well, I think the fact that it would take a nurse over 20,000 years to accrue the same wealth as the Prime Minister is relevant when he's making the political choice to pursue further cuts to our public services, when through a series of wealth taxes, no cuts whatsoever are necessary. And if you give me 20 seconds, I can demonstrate that very easily. I've got it written in front of me here. End non-dom status, £3 billion. Annual 1% tax on wealth, over £5 million. to £10 billion, 45 pence income tax rate over £80,000 and a 50 pence rate over £125,000, £6 billion. And finally, if you equalise dividend and capital gains tax with income tax rates, that would raise £21 billion. Those measures I've just read would raise £40 billion, which is exactly the amount of money the government is saying it needs to cut. And the reason that we've got this is because we've got a Prime Minister and a government that is on the side of the super rich, not on the side of the majority. It's a political choice that they're making.
Well, it's very nice. I like your budget. Richard Bergen's budget just been presented there. Do you agree? We'll see pictures of the Commons.
It's clear that the green-eyed monster is alive and kicking in the Labour Party today. All of those policies will actually destroy the economy.
Jealous, not jealous of the Prime Minister.
The non-doms will leave, and they make a huge contribution. The top 1% are already paying 28% of all the taxes. Well, that level of income doesn't buy you health, happiness or friends. It buys you choices. And one of the biggest choices they've got is which country they want to be domiciled in for tax. And they won't be in this country. You saw when Hollande came into France, to power in France, that they migrated to London, so and they can move just as fast.
You support real terms pay cuts for public sector workers instead,
and no one's going to
pay the fair share.
No one's going to believe that a wealth tax will be a one-off. And what messages are we sending to businesses set up in our country? And if the government thinks you've made too much money, we'll confiscate.
These are very moderate taxes. You're taking the political choice to make the majority.
We're living in political reality and financial reality. Just like with the housing, your plans would actually make the problem worse, not better.
Let me just bring in the other two guests. There is a broader issue here about where you might bring in more revenue. Is it about broadening the taxes that sounds like, from the Chancellor and Rishi Sunak, more people are going to be hit? It might be freezing income tax thresholds for longer. Do you go for wealth taxes? I mean, what do you think would be fairer, Naomi, in terms of trying to raise revenue?
Well, I mean, any observer of tax policies globally knows that the fairest thing to do is to tax wealth over income and to have redistributive.
I'm going to have to cut in there because we have Prime Minister's questions. Let's go into the chamber.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised integrity, professionalism and accountability in government. His Home Secretary has leaked information, is overseeing chaos in the Home Office and has broken the law. What will she actually have to do to get the sack?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary made an error judgment, but she recognised her mistake and took accountability for her actions. But she has now set out transparently, in detail, a full sequence of events in a letter to the Labour chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, offered to share relevant documents with the chair, and she is now getting on with the job, cracking down on crime, defending our borders, something I know the party opposite has no interest in supporting.
My 19-year-old Congleton constituent, Mary, who has been in care much of her life, has worked long and hard by childminding and in other ways to save £3,600 to help support herself at university. Mary now faces her university studies with no savings and no means of recovering them because it has all been stolen from her in a few seconds by a heartless scammer pretending to be her bank. What assurance can the Prime Minister give that the government is working hard to help prevent this type of all-too-common, despicable crime and bring the perpetrators to book?
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about Marie's case that my honourable friend raises, and I know how convincing scammers can be and the upset and hurt that they cause. I'm pleased to reassure my honourable friend that the government will shortly be publishing our fraud strategy, which will establish a more unified, coordinated response from government and law enforcement and the private sector to block more scams and to better protect the public.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Home Secretary says the asylum system is broken. Who broke it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's just we can look at the record on migration policy. Let's look at it. What did we on this side of the House do? We gave the British people a referendum on Brexit. We delivered Brexit. We ended the free movement of people, Mr. Speaker. That's our record on migration policy. It's not something the honourable gentleman supported. He opposed it at every turn, and it's not what the British people want.
No one wants open borders on this side of the House. They've lost control of the borders on their side of the House. Mr. Speaker, four Prime Ministers in 5 years, and it's the same old, same old. He stands there and tries to pass the blame. If the asylum system is broken, and his lot have been in power for 12 years, how can it be anyone's fault but theirs?
Mr. Speaker, people rightly want to see us getting a grip of migration in our borders. But look, let's look at the record. Let's look at the record. The right honourable gentleman, he voted against the Nationality and Borders Bill. He said he would scrap the Rwanda partnership. He opposed the ending of free movement of people. Look, border control is a serious, complex issue. But not only does the party opposite not have a plan, they have opposed every single measure we have taken to solve the problem. You can't attack a plan if you don't have a plan.
We voted against it because we said it wouldn't work, and it hasn't worked. He says he's getting a grip, he's got a plan. So let's have a look at that plan. The Rwanda deal was launched in April. It cost the taxpayer £140 million and rising. The number of people deported to Rwanda is 0. Since then, 30,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats. It's not working, is it? He hasn't got a grip.
Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House are clear that we want to defend our borders. When the Shadow Home Secretary this weekend was asked, she couldn't answer a simple question if the party opposite was in favour of higher or lower migration. It's that simple. The Home Secretary and I, when it comes to tackling on migration, reducing migration, we are on the same page. That party's policy, it's a blank page, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, blame others, deflect, attack on something else. So much the new age of accountability. Of all the people who arrived in small boats last year, how many asylum claims have been processed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do need. Mr. Speaker, not enough is the answer, very straightforwardly. Not enough. And that's what we're going to fix. But the honourable gentleman raises this question. What are we doing? We've increased the number of processing officials by 80%. We are putting an extra 500 more by next March. But if he really was serious about fixing this problem, then he would acknowledge that we do need to tackle the issue of people putting spurious claims, spurious, repeated, last-minute claims to frustrate the process. That's how we'll tackle the system. So why, then, did he vote against the Nationality and Borders Act, which deals with it?
Mr. Speaker, he says not enough. You could say that again. It's 4%. 4% of people arriving in small boats last year had their asylum claim processed. According to the bookies, the Home Secretary has a better chance of becoming the next Tory leader than she has of processing an asylum claim in a year. And he talks about numbers. They're only taking half the number of asylum decisions that they used to. That's why the system is broken. 4,000 people at the Manston Air Force Base, massively overcrowded, all sorts of diseases breaking out. So, did the Home Secretary receive legal advice that she should move people out? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is very fond of reminding us that he used to be the former Director of Public Prosecutions. So he knows the government's policy on commenting on legal advice. But what I can say is the significant action that the Home Secretary has taken to fix the issue. Since September, 30 more hotels with 4,500 new beds, appointing a senior general to control the situation at Manston, and indeed increasing the number of staff there by almost a half, Mr. Speaker. These are significant steps to demonstrate that we are getting a grip of this system. But this is a serious and escalating problem. We will make sure that we control our borders, and we will always do it fairly and compassionately, because that's the right thing.
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, he talks about my time as Director of Public Prosecutions. I prosecuted people smugglers. He can't even get an asylum claim process. I think the answer to the question whether the Home Secretary received legal advice to move people out of Marsden is yes. He just hasn't got the guts to say it. He did a grubby deal with her, putting her in charge of Britain's security just so he could dodge an election. She's broken the ministerial code, lost control of a refugee centre and put our security at risk. She did get one thing right. She finally admitted that the Tories have broken the asylum system. Criminal gangs running amok, thousands crossing the Channel in small boats every week, hardly any claims processed. So why doesn't he get a proper Home Secretary, scrap the Rwanda gimmick, crack down on smuggling gangs, end the small boat crossings, speed up asylum claims and agree an international deal on refugees? Start governing for once and get a grip.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman.
Front rows. Can we just calm it down a little? I do want to hear the replies. You're covering your mouth's not helpful to me or you. Come on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman rightly raised the topic of national security, because it is important. But this is the person who in 2019 told the BBC, and I quote, "I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister." Mr. Speaker, let's remember that national security agenda, abolishing our armed forces, scrapping the nuclear deterrent, withdrawing from NATO, voting against every single anti-terror law we tried, befriending Hamas and Hezbollah. He may want to forget about it, but we will remind him of it every week, because it's the Conservative government that will keep this country safe.
To my register of interest. Mr. Speaker, right now we are suffering the worst outbreak of avian flu ever recorded. Hundreds of thousands of birds are being destroyed to stem the spread of this terrible disease. The government's acted quickly to bring forward compensation for live birds culled to 48 hours after confirmation of disease. But even this short delay is causing significant losses to farmers in Broadland as the disease wreaks havoc to flocks. Dead birds are not compensated. Today is Back British Farming Day. Will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to back British farmers and agree compensation for all affected birds from the date when disease is confirmed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who represents a very rural and farming community, it is a great pleasure to back British Farming Day and join with colleagues on all sides of the House in doing so. But my honourable friend is right to highlight that outbreaks of avian flu this year are on track to be some of the worst on record. That's why we've toughened up biosecurity measures on poultry farms, and I can say to him that we have confirmed we will now pay compensation from the outset of planned culling rather than at the end, a request that I know he and the farming sector will warmly welcome.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May of this year, the new Prime Minister told this chamber, and I quote, "I can reassure the House that next year's benefits will be uprated by this September CPI, and the triple lock will apply for the state pension." But last week, the Prime Minister repeatedly refused to say if he would keep to a promise that he made only 5 months ago. Prime Minister, people don't need to hear any more spin about compassionate conservatism. People just need a straight answer to a simple question. Will he keep his promise and lift benefits and pensions in line with inflation?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do now have an excellent new Chancellor, and I'm looking forward to his autumn statement in a couple of weeks. It wouldn't be right to comment on individual policy measures before then, but I think everyone knows we do face a challenging economic outlook and difficult decisions will need to be made. But what I would say is that we will always, as my track record as Chancellor demonstrates, have fairness and compassion at the heart of everything we do.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was a very simple question asking for the Prime Minister to reiterate what he promised just 5 months ago. For the second week running, he still won't give a straight answer to the most vulnerable that require support. The Prime Minister keeps telling us that difficult decisions need to be made, but austerity 2.0 isn't a difficult decision. It is what it has always been, a Tory political choice to hit the poorest hardest. In the week that BP saw quarterly profits of £7.1 billion, why not take the easy decision to bring in a proper windfall tax? Why not take the easy decision to reinstate the cap on bankers' bonuses? Why not take the easy decision to scrap the non-dom tax avoidance? And with all that new revenue, why not stand up today and take the easiest decision of all, to protect those most in need and increase benefits and pensions in line with inflation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raised the issue of North Sea, and this is a point of significant difference between his party and ours. As Chancellor, I introduced the new levy on oil and gas companies because I believe that was the right thing to do. But where we will always differ is we believe that our North Sea producers do have an important role to play in our transition to net zero. They are an important source of transition fuels, and we will make sure that we support them to invest in exploiting those resources for the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly welcome the IPU delegation from Madagascar who are in today's viewing gallery. More locally, I'm delighted that next year Openreach will be rolling out ultra-fast broadband in Wigginton in my constituency. But other rural areas of South West Hertfordshire, like Dudswell, are still in dire need of better connectivity. Can the Prime Minister update the House on the progress of the £5 billion Project Gigabit?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is absolutely right to recognise the role of broadband in providing levelling up opportunities across our economy. That's why we invested £5 billion in Project Gigabit, and now we have 71% of UK premises having access to this from just 5% when we came into office. I'm very pleased to tell my honourable friend that we will be launching a procurement to provide gigabit coverage for his area in the coming weeks.
Dilhambe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that it's Scotland's energy resources that feed corporate profits and keep His Majesty's Treasury pumped full of cash to the tune of £8 billion in the last 9 months alone. In return, candidates in the summer Tory leadership contest tried to outdo each other in their contempt and hostility to Scotland's democracy. So without falling back on the "you've had your vote" trope, can the Prime Minister tell me, is Scotland in a voluntary and respectful union of equals as claimed in 2014, or are we hostages in a territorial British colony?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, what people across Scotland rightly want to see is both their governments working constructively together to improve their lives. That's what we will do on this side of the House. And part of that is actually supporting Scottish energy producers, which he is right, have a vital role to play in enabling our transition to net zero and improving our energy security. And those Scottish companies will have our full support.
Scott Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 40,000 illegal immigrants have crossed the Channel so far this year, landing taxpayers with a hotel bill of £5.6 million per day to accommodate them. Is it any wonder that millions of people in this country are furious with the situation? Prime Minister, during the summer you set out a comprehensive 10-point plan to tackle this issue. Everybody on this side of the chamber wants you to succeed in this aim. When can we expect the firm action the British people are demanding?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know this issue is rightly a priority for my honourable friend. It's a priority for his constituents, and I can reassure them that it is a priority for me and this government too. Whether it's the Nationalities and Borders Act or the further measures we are planning to take, we will defend our borders, stop the illegal crossings, and ensure that there is fairness and compassion in our system. That is the way to restore trust, and that is what his constituents and the British people deserve.
Jimmy Still.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, I have a constituent who is a supermarket worker,
She's paid full weekly because she receives one double salary payment. There's 1 month of the year where she receives no universal credit. Normally not an issue, Mr. Speaker. However, because universal credit is linked to the cost of living payment, my constituency now no longer qualifies for the £320 that could see her through the very worst of a cold Highland winter. What could the Prime Minister do to mend this gap in the cost of living support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the honourable gentleman is we also provided discretionary funding, which was provided through Barnett to the Scottish Government, especially to deal with cases like the one that he raised. But we'd be very happy if he wants to write to us with the constituents' details to look into it. But discretionary funding was made available, especially for cases like that.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was visited at one of my surgeries in Broxtowe by my constituent, Aaron Horsey. In his arms was his 3-week-old newborn baby, Tim. Aaron's wife, Bernadette, tragically passed away whilst giving birth to Tim. Aaron came to see me regarding the disparity that exists over shared parental leave. The current eligibility requirements differ between that of the surviving birthing partner as compared to the surviving non-birthing partner. And this meant in Aaron's case he was not entitled to leave to raise his son. Would the Prime Minister ensure that both my constituent and I can meet with the relevant minister to make sure that we move towards a future where parents are not in this position?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know the whole House will join me in extending our condolences to Aaron following the tragic loss of his wife, and I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue. Employed parents can benefit from statutory support depending on personal circumstances. I'm very concerned to hear that that is not happening in this case, and I will of course ensure that he gets a meeting with a relevant minister as soon as possible to resolve this issue.
Deirdre Brown.
Mr. Speaker, will the PM join me in condemning opaquely funded so-called think tanks who exert so much influence on gullible politicians that their policies were able to almost crash the UK economy just weeks ago? Open Democracy reports a former member of the Charity Commission board has called for the Institute of Economic Affairs to be stripped of its charitable status, saying the very purpose of the IEA, shrinking the state, is political. Is it right this body receives charitable tax status? And will the PM meet with me to discuss the influence bodies such as the IEA exert on politicians, including what influence they still have with him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously charitable status is a matter for the Charities Commission, but more generally, I actually do believe in free speech and vibrant debate of ideas. That is a good thing, and we should do absolutely nothing to stamp it out, even when we disagree with it.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the run-up to the autumn statement, will my right honourable friend do everything he can to persuade the Chancellor to assist those people who took out mortgages in good faith and now are at risk of losing their homes through unaffordable increases?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise mortgage payments. It's why it is absolutely crucial that we put our public finances on a sustainable footing to limit the increase in interest rates, because ultimately that is what puts pressure on people's mortgage payments. That's what this government is determined to do. And in the short term, there are support available through the welfare system for those with mortgage payments, and I hope he can direct his constituent to those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the continued Russian invasion and the now illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine, will the Prime Minister recommit his government to pursuing the full and proper accountability, including through the International Criminal Court, of those who violate international law in territories that they occupy? And in particular, will he pursue the rigorous application of the 4th Geneva Convention in terms of the treatment of civilian populations in militarily occupied areas?
The honourable gentleman for his question, which is absolutely right. I can confirm we will continue with the policy that the previous government put in place, and I think it's something that we can be proud of, that we provided, I think, the earliest technical support to gather evidence to put cases together for future prosecutions at the ICC. We will continue to gather evidence, provide support to the Ukrainians, because he's absolutely right. What we are hearing is abhorrent, it's wrong, and those who are conducting these things must be held to account.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and I both represent rural constituencies, and he will know the difficulty in securing both NHS dentistry and GPs in rural areas. We on this side of the House know that the financial decisions that he and the Chancellor are going to be taking are going to be tough. Notwithstanding that, can I urge him to ensure that as many initiatives as possible can be supported and put in place in order to make sure that GPs and dentists know that working in rural areas is an attractive place and to encourage their recruitment and retention.
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of healthcare provision in rural areas, which our constituents feel acutely because of the distances they have to travel. He has my assurance we will continue to prioritise both dentistry and GP recruitment to make sure that everyone in this country has access to the primary health care that they need and deserve.
Chris Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to be bullied into silence by anybody in this House. With the highest peacetime tax rates, food inflation running at 11.6%, mortgage rates rising dramatically, and a £50 billion hole in the public finances, the Prime Minister knows that Britain's broke. What is it about the 12 years of Tory rule and 5 years of him as a minister that has made such a mess of Britain?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the economy, the honourable gentleman just failed to mention the single biggest cause of the challenges that we face right now, which is absolutely the aftermath of a global pandemic which has affected supply chains across the world, and an illegal war being conducted by Putin, which is leading to high energy prices. These are the root cause of the challenges we are facing. The challenges we are facing are global in nature. It is wrong to say that they are particular to this country now, and we will, of course, do what we always do on this side of the House, deliver a strong economy for the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In last summer's heatwave, people across Essex witnessed terrible fires. And last month in Ethiopia, I witnessed the horrific climate change-driven drought that is forcing millions of people across the Horn of Africa to the brink of famine. I've discussed climate change with my right honourable friend. I know he cares, and it's great that he's going to Sharm el-Sheikh. But we, the UK, brought the world to Glasgow for COP26. It's vital that we remain world leaders on climate change. So please confirm this government will fulfil the promises that we, the UK, made in Glasgow.
Minister. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for her work and role that she has played in us championing the fight against climate change. And I agree with her. There is no long-term prosperity without action on climate change, and there is no energy security without investment in renewables. That's why I will attend COP27 next week to deliver, Mr. Speaker, on Glasgow's legacy of building a secure, clean and sustainable future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Prime Minister was secretly recorded boasting to friends that he had helped divert money away from deprived areas like Coventry towards wealthy areas, staff at Coventry's hospital are still paying £600 a year to park at work. So when will the Prime Minister stop hammering working people in my community?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady was asking about car parking in NHS hospitals, if I'm understood her rightly. We did introduce temporary free car parking during the pandemic. That was the right thing to do. And now all NHS trusts that charge for parking have implemented our free parking manifesto commitment for those in the greatest need, including hard-working NHS staff who work overnight.
Speaker, on Back British Farming Day, will the Prime Minister recognise with all members of the House the important role that farmers take and recognise that public money for public good means producing food in this country? But could he also recognise the value that our trade deals are doing in allowing us to export our high-quality produce around the world, in particular the Australia Agreement, where a member of this House will be able to enjoy a certain delicate cut in his bush trucker trials?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. British farmers are indeed the lifeblood of our nation. I join him in celebrating their contribution. I agree with him we need to prioritise food security, and he is right to champion free trade deals. They open up new markets and new opportunities for great British produce, and we will continue to open up more markets for our farmers everywhere.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the first Prime Minister from Yorkshire for a very long time, but and I'm trying to be kind to him this morning. Isn't it the fact that since he resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer on the 5th of July, we've had the most turbulent economic and political disaster in our country than any of us can remember? And when he reflects on that, will he also think why, when he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he did not help ordinary working people as well as he could? Yes? And can he now take the opportunity to tax the non-DOMs, who are 70,000 of them, that are getting away with avoiding tax? And will he bring in a tax on windfall profits on the gas and oil industry?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of my record as Chancellor in this country. And maybe the honourable gentleman could talk to the 10 million people who had their jobs saved through furlough. Maybe he could talk to the millions of those on the lowest incomes who benefited from the changes we made to universal credit. This will always be a fair and compassionate government that has the most vulnerable at our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With only 2 out of 10 autistic adults currently in employment, it's clear that much more needs to be done to realise their potential. Will my right honourable friend work with me to make sure that business and industry help close that alarming employment gap?
Well, I know this is an area that my right honourable friend rightly champions and knows an enormous amount about. I look forward to working with him closely to get his recommendations on how we and industry can improve the lives of those who need our help.
Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister who broke the asylum system. He dodged the question. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that the backlog is now so great, decision-making so collapsed, and returns so low, at a tenth of what they used to be, that the criminal gangs have a business model to die for. Whose fault is that?
Mr. Speaker, the reason we are in this situation is because of the unprecedented number of people arriving here illegally, often from safe third countries. Now, if the party opposite was really serious about this, they would realise that we have to stop illegal migration, that we have to stop the exploitation of vulnerable people abroad. But they have opposed every single measure we have taken. They're not serious about this problem because they don't think it matters.
Tom Hunt.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Both myself and many of my constituents remember fondly the Prime Minister's visit to Ipswich when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. We spoke about levelling up, and he made it clear to me levelling up isn't just about one part of the country, it's a national mission. Therefore, does the Prime Minister agree that a great way to show people of Ipswich this would be support of our levelling up fund bit to get Ipswich active, £18 million, £15 million for Gaines Resort Centre, £3 million for the outdoor Lido in Broomhill?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. Levelling up is about spreading opportunity in every part of our United Kingdom, ensuring people have pride in the place they call home. I look forward to seeing his Levelling Up Fund bid, and I know it will be being considered over the course of this year, and I wish him every success.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. So much weight.
And that brings us to the end of this week's Prime Minister's Questions. The second time Rishi Sunak, as Prime Minister, has faced Keir Starmer at the dispatch box. Let's introduce our guests for this part of the Politics Live programme. Andrew Bowie for the Government, Minister for Exports in the Department of International Trade. Emily Thornberry for Labour, Shadow Attorney General. And Vicky Young, my colleague, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, because Keir Starmer devoted all his questions, perhaps perhaps unsurprisingly, to both her own conduct and the asylum system that she is presiding over. What struck you about the questions and the responses? Bearing in mind this is the second week that he has focused attention on her.
Well, yeah, and that shows how he thinks and the opposition think and some Conservative MPs think that actually reappointing her was a misstep and an error of judgment. Now, it's not just, of course, the fact that she had to resign for potentially breaking the ministerial code over that security leak. It's also what she said since. So the fact that she got up when she first appeared in the Commons this week, the first time we'd heard from her, and talked about the asylum system and saying that it was broken and that illegal immigration was out of control, of course, that gives a very easy comeback from the opposition to say, well, you have been in power for 12 years. How are you going to sort it out? And interesting there, right at the end, Rishi Sunak talking about, well, we've got more numbers coming into the country trying to come here and claim asylum. Actually, there is also a problem with processing. And, of course, how do you deal with that and how do you then send people back who have been unsuccessful? And there are 101,000 outstanding claims. And that is actually what the problem is here. And he didn't really have an answer to that. His answer seemed to be, we're going to sort it out. And that, you know, obviously allows the opposition to say, well, when are you going to do that?
Andrew Bowie, Keir Starmer, as Vicky Young has just said, was quoting the Home Secretary herself with the words, the asylum system is broken, illegal immigration is out of control. Can you just say here, very straightforwardly, the Conservatives are the one who broke the system because they've been in power for 12 years?
Well, no, the asylum system is under an immense amount of pressure due to the fact that we have got tens of thousands of people taking these treacherous crossings across the English Channel, being manipulated into that and bullied into these boats by people's trafficking gangs on the other side of the Channel. And we need to get that under control. The Prime Minister has admitted, the Home Secretary has admitted, that we are not processing claims quick enough, that we need to act to address what's happening on the Channel.
The system's broken. Who broke the system, as Keir Starmer
Well, it's under immense amount of pressure, 40,000.
No, but that's not the answer. Who broke the system? You've said it's under immense pressure. It can only be the Conservatives. They're the only ones who have been in power for 12 years.
We're actually the only ones coming up with any solutions to the issues that we have got facing us as a result of the huge numbers of people coming across the Channel, which is a situation that we did not have 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, but there's been more than 40,000 applying in the past. I mean, this isn't the highest level that it's ever been, but this is the worst situation we've ever found ourselves in. So that's the difference. Of course, it's pressure with 40,000, but we've had higher numbers in the past, and they've been dealt with much better than you're dealing with them right now. And it's your government.
Well, we have a new immigration minister in Robert Jenrick who is determined to address these issues, is getting his feet under the table, and we will be taking action in the immediate future to rectify the situation that we have at Manston, on the Channel, and indeed process immigration asylum claims quicker.
Rishi Sunak responded a hit back at Keir Starmer and saying Labour doesn't have a plan. It's certainly offering a very dramatic critique of the government's failure to deal with this issue when it has promised to do so repeatedly. But what is Labour's plan to stop those small boats coming over?
I think we have to take an overall view of the asylum system. And the fact is that this isn't about putting a limit on the number of people coming into the country or anything else. It is, if you come to Britain and you claim asylum and you are fleeing persecution, you should have, and historically you have had, the right to remain here and to get asylum.
So what do you do about illegal immigration?
So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we deal with the gangs.
How?
Listen, we have been talking for years about the importance...
And have yet to come up with a plan.
Wait a minute. We have been talking for years and pressing the government for years to ensure that they work with the French. And what did we see? We saw Priti Patel being banned from meetings with the French because of the rhetoric and because of the way she'd been playing to the gallery in Britain. She wasn't even allowed to talk to the French. Then we got the last Prime Minister saying she couldn't work out if the President of France was a friend or a foe. I hear Rishi Sunak now says that he wants to talk to the French and wants to work with them in order to stop the gangs. Well, thank goodness. It would have been a very good idea if that had been done many years ago. So that has to be number one.
All right. Well,
number two...
Well, hang on, Andrew. Hang on, Andrew. I'm going to let you come back in just a minute.
About my plan.
You are, but that's your plan. That's part of your plan, is to have a deal with the French that they could say no to.
Which we already have, by the way.
Well,
and
hang
they're
on.
not acting.
Let Emily do her second part. Go on.
If I can speak, I'll speak. So we have to have a deal with the French. We have to make sure that we speak to them. We have to have a proper negotiations with them. We need to work with them. We need to have an agreement with them, and you do that by developing good relationships and making sure that it's in everybody's interest to ensure that the gangs are... The next thing is that you need to make sure that you actually, when people come here, you know, if you are here as a refugee, you should not be sleeping on the floor of a tent for months on end, not being processed at all. You need to be processed quickly. And the idea that it takes 450 days to get the average case dealt with is absolutely appalling. Now, it's not glamorous. It's not like, let's pass a law. It's like, let's do your job properly. Let's be the Home Secretary who doesn't, you know, spend her time doing culture wars, but actually does her job.
All right,
so,
well, let's pick up on
make
that.
the decisions on that. And then, I mean, do you know how many days it takes for an unaccompanied minor to be processed? 550. And they have lost 220 children who came to Britain claiming asylum, and now they are lost in Britain.
Right,
I mean, this is... And once we have got these people processed faster, then they can... I mean, 70% historically get asylum, and they're then able to work. They're then able to look after their families. They then don't cost our country any money.
All right.
But if you have to wait for more than a year to be processed, you are dependent on the state.
Well, let's look at the backlog. Why can't you process asylum applications?
Well,
4% is woeful.
It is woeful. The Prime Minister admitted as such today. Robert Jenrick said as much last week. We are addressing this. We are taking action to speed things up.
What is it? What are you doing?
We are increasing the speed at which asylum claims are processed.
But why haven't you been able to do it? What's the problem?
Because there has been immense pressure on the system as a result of the tens of thousands of people coming across the Channel in small boats. So we need to get to grips with that. For Emily to suggest that we're not working with the French have had millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money to deal with the situation on the side of the Channel.
Hang on, let him respond.
96% of people who came over here in a small boat last year have not even been processed. So all the people who are taking the mickey out of the system are still sitting around in hotels.
All right.
And they should have been, a decision should have been made, and they should have been sent.
Well, let me just ask both of you. Should more people be employed to actually process the claims?
We are taking the action necessary to speed up the process that we have right now. We recognise that the situation is not where it should be. We will be taking every step possible to increase the speed at which we process these claims. The situation is not good enough. The Prime Minister said as such today, and we will be getting grips with it.
Should more people be employed? More bureaucracy?
We should be employing more people, and where we pay for that from is by cancelling the Rwanda policy,
now
which costs £140 million, and not a single person has been sent to Rwanda. If we spent that money on employing more people to make decisions, and for those decisions to be made efficiently, then we would be able to clear the hotels, we would be able to clear Manston, and we would be able to get the system working again properly.
So under Labour, with all the points that you've set out, Emily, are you saying the small boats would be stopped?
No, I'm saying that we also need to have safe and legal routes.
Well, there are some, but you want to expand.
Well,
there are safe and legal routes.
There are some.
Well, there are safe and legal routes, but the people come to this country...
How do people have safe and legal routes to claim asylum in the UK at the moment?
People have asylum... people come through safe and legal routes to the United Kingdom all the time. We've got a very proud history of receiving asylum seekers, refugees, people fleeing conflict and destitution, and we will continue to have that.
In order to be able to get into the UK, Emily, you have to have a reason for to be able to from certain countries, and you cannot walk into an embassy at the moment and claim asylum. Emily, those routes have all been closed down, and so it means
they haven't all been
very
closed
difficult
down.
for people
they have
to
not all been closed down. That's nonsense.
What happens is that people have to find illegal ways of getting into the country and then claim asylum. Now that's wrong. It's not fair.
Should they be expanded? The schemes that would include people coming from Afghanistan, the scheme that includes refugees claiming asylum coming from Syria but might be in refugee camps in other countries like Jordan. You have the family scheme where people can join relatives in the UK. And those schemes have been up and running for some time, but should they be expanded?
Well, we would like to expand them.
Right.
But the situation as it is right now is that the system is being put under such pressure by the tens of thousands of people crossing the Channel. That is actually doing detriment to the safe and legal routes that we have from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, for example, for people who want to seek a life in the United Kingdom as a result of the actions of the Chinese Communist Party in that region. So we want to do more to help those people access safe and legal routes to get to this country. The way that we do that is by dealing with the situation on the Channel, and as yet, I haven't haven't heard one thing from the Labour Party, Emily here just now, Keir in the chamber a second ago, as to how they would address this situation, cancel Rwanda, employ more people, and suddenly the situation will resolve itself. That's utter nonsense, and I think Emily knows it.
Well, let's just talk about one of the other things that was raised actually by Rishi Sunak. He accused Keir Starmer. He said that he'd voted against every single policy, every single piece of legislation that might help get a grip on this issue, and referred to his history of supporting remaining in the EU and freedom of movement. Is there any indication in your mind that actually you would like to see levels of net migration go back up?
So first of all, I think that it's difficult to agree that we have voted against legislation that might help, because it clearly hasn't helped and it doesn't help. And we're happy to support legislation that would make a difference, but not just simply grandstanding and pretending to be, as the Tories do. They pass legislation, oh, this will fix it, and it clearly, palpably is not fixing it. So we're not voting for legislation.
And on net migration, which last year was around 240,000, so still quite high. I think at its height it was 340,000. Is that a number that you want to bring down, or that you want to be able to vary year to year?
So what we want to do is we want to have a points-based system. So what we want to do is look at what the needs of the economy is. So if we need to have more doctors, if we need to have more people working in social care, or whatever the things are, we would then be able to give people points to come to our country in order to help the economy. So it depends what the needs of the economy are and what the needs of the different regions are.
So they could go up. So the net migration target
could go down. And what we want, obviously, for example, in health and social care, is we have a really ambitious strategy to ensure, which we want to introduce if we're given the opportunity to serve the public, is to increase the number of trained people working in health and social care, so we wouldn't need to have such large numbers of people coming from abroad. So in that sector, success would look like having less people coming. So it really depends on what the state of the economy is.
Does Rishi Sunak and the government have a clear policy on net migration?
Yes, of course we do. We want to keep migration at acceptable levels and at acceptable levels to the British people. Well, it depends on the economic requirements of the country at the time.
Is it tens of thousands, as Suella Braverman has said?
To suggest that we are not taking those steps that Emily suggests right now is fanciful. We just expanded the SAWS scheme to over 50,000. That's the seasonal agricultural worker scheme, so we can get people into the country, because agriculture, food farming, production, they need more people to be doing the jobs on the farm, so we can pick more fruit and then export.
And how many harvests have rotted in the field until you finally decided to do the right thing? I mean, that is a scheme which has been going exactly since the 1940s, in fact.
Yes.
And then it was suspended, and so finally you've now reintroduced it. Well, good for you.
It was never suspended, Emily. That's nonsense. We've just increased the numbers as a result of the NFU and the NFUS asking for those numbers to be increased.
And have
We've
been
listened
for years.
And we have acted.
And have been for years.
I'm going to bring in Vicky Young on this debate on net migration.
Yeah, well, there was actually, there was a big battle in Cabinet, actually, about getting more visas for that. And actually, there have been some in your party who've been trying to block that. The interesting thing, if we go back to Suella Braverman and that initial leak, that was about growth visas. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, they were obviously trying to bring in something which was going to allow more people into the country on working visas. Now, the interesting thing, and I don't think we know the answer to this, but maybe you do, is Rishi Sunak in favour of that? Because I don't think we know much about actually where Rishi Sunak stands on this idea of migration and legal migration and allowing more people in. Does he think that we should fill those gaps, if you like, in the workforce?
Of course he does. Rishi Sunak is very much in favour of bringing the people to this country that we need to do the jobs that this country needs. He always has been. He's always been in favour of that. And as Prime Minister, he's very, very happy to support, for example, the increase in the numbers of the seasonal agricultural worker scheme.
Right, but actually, at Prime Minister's questions, he didn't say that, as I understand it, Andrew. He said that was Labour's policy. He wants to bring net migration down. And in order to bring net migration down overall, you'd have to cut the numbers, not increase them.
No, of course we want to bring net migration down, but we are always going to be reliant, due to the nature of the British economy, on people coming from overseas to do the jobs that we need them to do in this country, for example, in agriculture. And Rishi Sunak will take those decisions based on the evidence that's placed before him at the time.
Right, so does he want to increase net migration annually or
he wants to keep
it?
migration at acceptable levels and overall wants to reduce migration.
And you would want to bring them up overall, really?
No, And what we would want to do is we would want to be able to have a migration system that suits our economy. So it depends how the economy is doing and how we are. If we are training more people up to be able to fill the gaps domestically in our economy, then we wouldn't need to have people. And what we want to be able to do is to skill people up so that we can have homegrown talent filling these jobs.
I suppose in the meantime, the implication is that where there is a gap, where there are labour shortages, Labour would just bring in people from abroad to fill those shortages, like 100,000 truck drivers, for example.
Well, what we have to do is we have to balance this against the need that we have to make sure our economy continues to grow. And frankly, our economy does grow under a Labour government and doesn't grow, or grows in a rather, pusillanimous way under the Tories. That's been part of the problem. And if we're going to continue to have the service level that we want to have to have an economy that grows. So if we're going to...
But no one's really being honest about where that line is. That's the problem, isn't it? No political party is saying, right, well, that line is... we want this much growth, therefore we will allow workers in and migration will go up by this much. No one's putting figures on any of that.
Right, and both of you then agreed that immigration would deliver higher levels of growth, higher levels of immigration or not?
Look, the government will take the decisions based on what is best for the economy at the time. Right now, our sole focus is getting the asylum system up and running to where we need it to be. We all agree it's not working properly right now. 4% is a woeful
But can I say it is really important to talk about the immigration system as being one thing and the asylum system as something else.
Yes.
And they are different. We give people asylum because we are a decent country that does the right thing and we look after people, who are being treated in the most appalling way. And so we give them asylum, we give them safe. Well, they give them somewhere safe to live. We don't put them in tents on the floor for weeks on end.
Well, since you brought that up, let's listen to the experience of a person who has spent 3 weeks in Manston, which is the asylum processing centre in Kent, before being moved to a hotel.
I slept on the floor. A lot of people were there. In one big tent there were maybe 130 people. It was cold. We can't go to the toilet. We can't take a shower, take a bath. We don't have any clothes. We are not animals. You can't eat or sleep. And I couldn't call my family to tell them I was okay. It was like a zoo.
Are those conditions acceptable, Andrew?
Absolutely not. Completely unacceptable. And that's why Robert Jenrick visited Manston last week, and that's why we're taking action to resolve the situation at Manston by speeding up the system and by taking action to ensure that the situation that gentleman found himself in is not replicated ever again.
But we heard from Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, Emily, that she doesn't want more hotel accommodation herself. So where would you put people waiting to claim asylum?
It's shameful to hear that. And what we want is we want to be able to get, if we are making the decisions at the other end, if we're not making people wait for 450 days...
Sure, but if you are in the situation you're in now and you don't want more hotel accommodation, which was the criticism of Suella Braverman, where would you put people while they wait?
So, if instead of people waiting 450 days in hotels, they were only waiting 400 days, then you would get the system unblocked. If 350 days, you get more people. So they have to address it further upstream, and they need to start making decisions. And the Home Office has stopped making decisions at the level that they're supposed to. The fact that we have only 96% of people who came to Britain in small boats last year have made they have not had a decision made. Only 4% have had a decision made at all. That is a really big part of the problem. And unless they make decisions about people's asylum status, then people who are genuine asylum seekers will continue to be treated in this appalling and shameful way.
How many more days or weeks, perhaps, are we going to hear questions being asked of Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary?
Well, that is a good question, and I think that's why there are so many Conservative MPs who are, very uneasy about all of this. And I think, she did add to it by what she said in the House of Commons earlier this week. Now, Rishi Sunak has made that decision to do it. There is one conspiracy theory doing the rounds amongst Tory MPs that he knew he had to bring her back because obviously she did back him in the leadership contest, but was well aware that she might end up making decisions and saying and doing things which would end up with her losing her job, and that's why there are jokes going
But that's so shocking. That's so shocking. You put someone in charge of Homeland Security.
Vicky said it was speculation.
That's what some Tory MPs have been saying. But, that is not what Rishi Sunak has said. He has said she's going to do the job and do it well. And so he's obviously hoping that she does so. But, you know, this is obviously a very fertile territory for the opposition leader.
A grubby deal is what it was called. What do you say?
Well, this is all rumour and speculation that, of course, Westminster thrives on. The Prime Minister has full confidence in the Home Secretary for her to take decisions necessary to deal with the issues that we have in front of us. And, of course, in Rob Jenrick, our new immigration minister...
Let me just put it like this. Yeah, let me put it like this. What are the qualities? You know, what is it? What is the evidence that she can do this job well? Because she has done nothing but be a car crash, you know, since she was given the job the first time and now the second time. So why would you give, of all the people in the Tory party, why would you give her the job? Because she backed him and because he's too weak to appoint anyone else. And he is playing with national security by putting her
Emily,
in that
from
role
somebody that backed Jeremy
that point.
Corbyn to be Prime Minister of this country, I think it's got a real nerve of anybody from the Labour Party to come on claiming they've got any ground to stand on talking about national security. The Prime Minister has got full confidence in his Home Secretary, and we're going to get to grips with the issues that are facing us at Manson and elsewhere to resolve the issues in our asylum system and to get it up and running properly. I'm not going to take any lectures from Labour on national security.
When it comes to Jeremy Corbyn, interesting, this is the second week in a row that Rishi Sunak has referred to the former Labour leader. Emily served in the shadow cabinet under him too. How long will that have traction?
Well, that's the other issue, isn't it, to not potentially answer the question directly and go back to a leader from a while ago. You know, it might work for a while, but it's not going to allow him to avoid those questions. But I think that's what, you know, obviously if you're attacking an opposition leader who doesn't have his own track record in government, you have to talk about other things. And obviously Rishi Sunak would say that, you know, your choice of serving under a certain kind of leader tells you something about the direction you're going in. But of course, as Keir Starmer, lots of critics on the left of the Labour Party would say, got to be leader, promising all sorts of things that might have chimed with Jeremy Corbyn's own manifesto, but then hasn't actually kept too many.
One might suggest he did a grubby deal with the members of the Labour Party to get the gig.
Well, on that, let's have a look at this, because coming up in a couple of weeks, on November the 17th, is that statement. The Financial Times a few days ago said Rishi Sunak signs off on across-the-board tax rises to plug £50 billion hole. Why do we have that £50 billion hole, Andrew?
Because of the global economic situation that we find ourselves in.
Right.
Yes, compounded by mistakes that were made by the previous administration. Not mistakes made through any sense of malice, but mistakes that were made. That has been admitted to by Rishi. We are now taking steps to address those mistakes and to ensure that the economy is on a firm footing moving forward. But we can't disregard the fact that the global economic situation, as was a month ago, was incredibly difficult, and we were not the only country facing the issues that we have. We are taking the action necessary now to get the economy moving in the right direction.
Why do the books have to be balanced on this, Emily? I mean, you know, there'll be people who just say, well, you know, we've had a pretty rough time with COVID, with the war in Ukraine. Yes, mistakes were made. We're in a worse situation than we might have been if that mini budget hadn't happened. But why do we have to balance the books? And why do we have to do it on the backs of taxpayers?
Well, I think in order to be able to borrow, we have to be able to prove to those who we borrow from that we have a plan for paying it back and that we're not just going to continue to get into more and more debt, which is why it's so wrong to borrow just for tax cuts or for day-to-day spending, and why it's really important to borrow for investing in the economy and getting the economy to grow, which is, again, why we have a really developed plan for the economy and how we want to look to the future. We want to have green growth. We want to be able to have a great British economy where we are producing the energy ourselves and where we can get rid of high bills forever because we will be creating our own energy.
Right, but if there was an election today, tomorrow, what would you do now, faced with however big the so-called black hole is in the public finances? How would you do it in terms of the split between tax rises and spending cuts?
I think my problem is at the moment is that we're still waiting for the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility to give us a proper assessment of just what damage the previous Prime Minister did to our economy. We still don't really know what that is.
Well, we know it's probably about 40
We know
billion.
it's bad, but we don't know how bad.
And on that, where would you put the sort of divide, if you like, in terms of meeting or bridging that gap?
I think I'm not going to write our manifesto now, I'm afraid, but I can give you some of the things that we would do. Right. So we've already said about how we would be growing the economy and the developed plans that we have for having a greener future as a country.
Although that would add to borrowing, of course, initially.
But it would definitely pay off. But that's the kind of relationship.
That's quite an assumption, Emily.
That's the relationship that we would have. This is the way in which we would travel. There are many things that we would do.
Yes.
We would increase some taxes on non-doms. We would get rid of VAT for private schools. We would
and the windfall tax.
There's a windfall tax.
Well, let's ask Andrew about the windfall tax. Is it time
forward
now just to come clean and say we need that higher windfall tax on oil and gas producers and others? Maybe there've been reports in the papers, 25%, maybe up to 30%. Make it longer. Make it go on for years. We've had £8 billion or dollars worth of profits from BP.
Yeah, the Prime Minister was the Chancellor that introduced the windfall tax in the first place.
But it's
go
not
further.
good enough.
But he also recognises the huge value added to the UK economy by our offshore oil and gas sector. And at a time where we're worried about energy security, and at a time where I would like to be less reliant on places like Russia and other countries around the world for our energy baseload, I think it's right that we're supporting the growth in our oil and gas industry in the North Sea. That's what this government's committed to. But we are taxing them more than we were before, because it is right that where profits are made that were unexpected, that they pay the due tax.
Shell isn't going to pay any windfall tax at all, we're told.
Vicky, what sort of decisions are we expecting from the Chancellor on the 17th?
Well, look, I think bluntly we can say that taxes will rise for almost everyone and for very many years probably, and there will be spending cuts. Now, the rate of increase in personal income tax, for example, that may not change, but don't forget you have things like freezing thresholds that's been used many times before.
And brings in a lot of money.
And the 2019 manifesto is what they keep talking about, and so if you look at that, you can really work out that that's what might be what happens.
Thank you very much to all of my guests today. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two. Bye-bye.